Hi, everyone. Welcome to day 3 of Borders brought to you by Miss DS. I am still very much learning the technology around Screencastify, so bear with me as I go through this. I thought it might be helpful if you saw my face. You could, I think, maybe turn me off if you don't want to, but I'm not sure how to do that. So welcome to day 3. Ms. Pearson brought you through the background of borders, what are borders, and different modern examples of different types of borders. So today and tomorrow, what we're going to be looking at is one specific example. What we're going to be looking at today is the Berlin Wall. I am modeling for you how I would like you to do your research project over the next couple of weeks. And again, I'll give you more information on that as time goes on, but you should know that in this research project, you will be asked to look at a border of your choosing and to go through the history of it, if it's a physical or political border, its impact, its symbolism. So everything that I'm doing today will be what you guys will be doing over the next couple of weeks. And you are free to choose any border you like in the world. And we'll give you some examples of that as well. So anyway, welcome. I miss you guys. This is definitely not the same. It's definitely not as exciting. Thank you for your patience as you bear with me for my first ever Screencastify. Hopefully this works. Fingers crossed. So what I would like you to do right now is go back into your Borders learning log. And that's the log that you're going to submit to Canvas on Friday by midnight. And on that log, you're going to see something that says day 3 due now. And that is where you're going to answer today's due now. So let's take a look here. Let's maybe move my face just a little bit. We don't need to see it that much. Okay. So let's think about the county of San Mateo for a second. It's where most of you live. And let's say they were to build a wall right here along Alameda de las Pulgas. So that would divide Hillsdale High School, Piazzas, Laurelwood from the mall, from the Caltrain. So I want you to think, what would it be like to live in a city divided by a physical wall? What would you do about getting to school, seeing your friends, going to the mall, traveling to somewhere else in the peninsula? What risks would you take to cross over to the other side? So what I would like you to do is to pause this video and then to answer that question. Okay, great. So let's move on. And I want you to be thinking about these ideas. Would you be willing to risk going over to the other side? What would happen to you if you went over? Would you miss your friends? Would it be okay because you don't really know anybody over there? Would there be some sort of competition between the two sides? How would it change your life? So our objective today is we're going to be able to explain what is the Berlin Wall and why it was created. Okay, now if you've heard of the Berlin Wall before, that's awesome. Does anybody know where the Berlin Wall is located or was located? Yes, very good. It is located in Germany. But before we dig into the Berlin Wall, we're going to need to look at what was the Cold War. So the Cold War was a time period between 1945 and 1992. This was a period of immense amount of tension between the USSR and the USA that followed World War II. There was no physical actual fighting between the USSR and the United States, but it was more like an ideological battle. When I say ideological battle, what I mean is it's a difference in beliefs. Okay, so the USSR was run for most of the Cold War under a pretty strong dictatorship, whereas the United States was run under a democracy with different presidents coming into power every 4 to 8 years, with the exception of John F. Kennedy here, who was assassinated in office. So the political systems were different, but what else was different were the economic system. The Soviet Union were staunch communists, whereas the West were staunch capitalists. And both sides did whatever they could within their power to ensure that the countries around them and the countries around the world were either capitalist or communist. Okay? And the world became divided between who chose which side of the war or which side of the battle. Take a look at this picture. It's one of my favorite political cartoons. Do we know who these people are? Well, yes, I just told you that this is President John F. Kennedy. Anybody know who this is? This is the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, who came into power a little after Stalin died. What do we notice? They are sitting on, I don't know, but they got this H here, another H there. Oh, these guys are sitting on hydrogen bombs. If we remember from our unit or from our day on the atomic bomb, hydrogen bombs were significantly more deadly than the atomic bomb that we dropped during World War II. As you see, these two men are engaging in this fist fight right now. Fist fight, no, in this arm wrestling competition. And that was sort of the extent of the Cold War. They would go back and forth and they would taunt each other. And we got really, really close to the brink of going to the war, to the brink of setting off hydrogen bombs, but we never actually did it. So let's go to the next one. Oh, my animation is not working. Let me see if I can do this full screen. Let's just try this for a second. Now, you'll lose me for a minute, but that's okay. So the tensions were created by the outcome of World War II. So the U.S. was now the world's most powerful nation. Again, it suffered minor amount of casualties, and with the exception of Pearl Harbor, there was no major damage done to national infrastructure. The USSR, again, similar to World War I, suffered more casualties than all other nations combined. Many Soviet cities were completely destroyed. If you think about Leningrad and Stalingrad. Some other differences. The US, they tried to influence all of Western Europe. In fact, they went as far to provide money to countries in something known as the Marshall Plan to get other countries not to turn communist. It was like a small form of bribery. They believed in capitalism, this idea of privately owned businesses, corporations drive economic activity, and of course, the promotion of individual rights and fair and free elections. The USSR, initially Stalin, who was still alive at the end of the war, did promise fair and free elections for the countries close to the Soviet Union that he was now controlling. Of course, that never actually happened, and they promoted the brand of communism. And primarily, with the exception of Gorbachev at the very end of the Cold War, most of the leaders were totalitarian. Okay, any questions? Okay, if you do, you can jot those down at the bottom of the sheet where it says questions on day 3. So what happened to Germany in all of this? So Germany was divided into 4 sectors. So we can see here, Germany was divided into this sector here was controlled by the USSR, whereas this sector here was controlled by France, I should know my flags better, England, and the United States. But eventually, these 3 countries, who all share similar ideologies or set of ideas, combined into one area. So it really became known as East and West Germany. But there's something really curious about what's happening. Berlin, as we see, is located in Eastern Germany. But what was fascinating about Berlin was that it was actually divided among the 4 countries. So if it was just making sure I'm still recording here. Okay, looks like I am. So it was divided among the 4 countries. The eastern part of Berlin was controlled by the Soviets, where the western part of Berlin, as you can see here, was controlled by the United States, England, and France, but really just we would call it West Berlin, controlled by the Western powers. Stalin was not so happy that the 3 countries combined into one area, right? That makes them a little bit more powerful. It's kind of like teaming up 3 versus 1. So he decides, like a totalitarian dictator is wont to do, that he's going to hold Berlin hostage. And what does that mean? He's going to cut off highway access, water access, railway access, meaning that the people in Berlin had no access to food, to coal, which was a major natural resource that they relied on, and the city was on the brink of starvation. This is not so dissimilar to what happened in Leningrad. So we could see here that Stalin thought he could get the US to surrender West Berlin and just give West Berlin to the Soviets. Because if we remember, All of Berlin is in the Eastern Territory, and Stalin wanted to control all of Berlin. It was a major city. There was a lot of economic activity. It was a real chance for Stalin to exert his power in this new time period. Remember, these two countries are fighting against each other, and having access to one of the world's, new up-and-coming cities would have given Stalin a lot more credibility and eventually power. So we could see in this picture that this bear, which is representing Stalin, as we can see with the hat on that Stalin was known to wear, the bear is holding the city of Berlin hostage. But the West got creative, and for 11 months, Britain and the United States airlifted food and supplies into West Britain. So this was known as the Berlin blockade. And when they started to bring in food and supplies, this was known as the Berlin airlift. And between June 1948 and May 1949, there were 278,000 flights that brought 2.3 million tons of food, fuel, and medicine to the citizens of West Berlin. I'm just going to X out of here just for 1 second, just to make sure that I'm still recording. Looks like I am. Great. Maybe you could still see my face the whole time. I have no idea. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go into what was the Berlin Wall. So I'm going to go back into the present mode. So what is the border that we're looking at? So again, when you do your own project, you're going to provide a brief history like I just did, and then you're going to talk about what is the border itself. So what was the Berlin Wall? Well, on August 13th, 1961, Communist Government of German Democratic Republic, which will hereon be referred to as GDR, or the East German Government, began to use barbed wire and concrete slabs to divide East and West Berlin. Now, if we remember, West Berlin is controlled by the Western powers and East Berlin is controlled by the Soviets. Eventually, the barrier became 500,000 feet long. But what was interesting is that only 140,000 of those feet were the physical wall, were the concrete slabs. There was barbed wire through the rest of it. So we could see here there are two men building the wall. Does anybody want to take a guess as to what they're layering on top of that wall? If you said glass, you are correct. Now, why would they be putting glass on top of the wall? Yep, so people don't escape. Nobody wants to get stuck on glass. Have you ever stepped on glass? That's painful. Imagine your whole body in glass. This is how serious GDR took this wall. They did not want anybody to go from one side to another. And tomorrow we're going to look at how people tried to escape and whether or not they were successful. So what was the Berlin Wall? It started off just as barbed wire and concrete, but over time it evolved into two concrete walls with a death strip in the middle. Yes, it was actually called a death strip. It was kind of like no man's land from World War I. In this death strip, they had watchtowers and armed guards. And in those watchtowers, the soldiers, sometimes 2 to 4 at a time, would be looking to see if anybody was trying to escape. And yes, they would shoot them if they saw them. There were bunkers, there were electric fences that would electrocute you, dog patrols, and 55,000 landmines. What I found the most interesting about what was in the death strip was something known as the Church of Reconciliation. Now, I think that's a bit ironic because reconciliation, as we know from the TRC, means to come back together. Now, it's interesting that there was a church that was named Reconciliation in the middle of an area that was completely dividing two different cities, two different ideologies, two different types of governments and political systems. Those are the same thing, and economic systems. Symbolically or not, the church later burned down. So here's a modern day picture of the Berlin Wall. Here we have the death strip, and you can see the sand in the middle, and here are the two concrete slabs. Excuse me. So now here, let's look at a little bit more in greater detail what the Berlin Wall looked like. As you could see here, the wall covered most of Berlin, West Berlin, around the outsides. If you look here, this is the death strip. And the death strip was made of sand so the guards could see if there were any footprints to see if anybody had tried to escape. Here's the signal fence. So if you tried to climb the fence, it would set off an alarm that would then go right into the watchtower. And this is where the armed guards stood around the clock. And again, this border was in place from 1961 to 1989. This part took a little while to build, but this was a long time that the city was divided like this. So what I would like you to do is I want you to think back to Ms. Pearson's lesson from day 1 and day 2. Is this a physical or political border or both? So take a minute, pause my beautiful voice, and answer the question in your learning log. When you're done, you can restart to finish up the lecture. Great. Nice job. Okay. So, well, it's definitely a physical border. It's a literal wall of concrete and fencing. Here you see the slabs, and then you see the barbed wire on the top. But it's also a political border as it divides different economic and political systems, right? Capitalism and democracy on the west, and communism and sort of a dictatorship on the east. And again, tomorrow we're going to really look at the impact of this border on the people of East and West Berlin. So why was this wall created? So we're going to finish up the lecture today by trying to connect back to our objective, which was understanding what is the Berlin Wall and why it was created. So we're almost finished for today. So East Germany was much poorer than West Germany and had lots of labor strikes due to the new economic system under communism. So even before the wall went up, East Berliners were feeling the brunt of the Soviet economic system. So they began fleeing to West Berlin. At the peak, there were 1,700 people a day fleeing from East Berlin to West Berlin. Between 1949 and 1961, when the wall went up, 3 million Germans went from East Berlin to West Berlin. They needed to create a wall to prevent people from fleeing. So as you can see in this picture, the wall really, before it was the barbed wire and before it was the concrete slabs, was a fence. So it was much easier for people to go from one side to another, even to escape if they weren't allowed to initially. But remember, people had family members and friends and colleagues and boyfriends and girlfriends and everybody on the other side. So they needed to be able to cross. And people did so fairly freely up until the end. So again, why was the wall created? To stop people from fleeing to West Berlin and creating what is known as a brain drain. If all these people are going from east to west, you're losing capital, you're losing brain power, you're losing people to work at your jobs, and your economy is going to suffer even more than it already is. So the wall was created to stop people from going from east to West Berlin. So our last check for understanding today is what was the Berlin Wall and why was it built? I would also like you in that check for understanding box to predict why would people try to escape? And I kind of gave this away already, but what do you think would happen to people who tried to escape? Also, if you have any questions on today's lecture, don't forget to add them to your document. I'm really hoping this was videotaping the whole time. Looks like it was. I did it. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I really miss you. This is really not as fun doing this from my own apartment, even if I am in my pajamas. Miss you guys a lot. Yeah, feel free to reach out and email me if you have any questions or put them on the doc. That would be even better. Talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.